Welcome to Resilience Unravelled. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Thackeray. This podcast is a result of my fascination with health issues, resilience, performance, mental health, accountability and critical thinking, along with many of the other obsessions I bump into in my life. I spend my time working with highly successful teams, organisations and people, and this podcast introduces their remarkable stories, as well as my synthesis of the key issues, tips and strategies to thrive in life. If you find this podcast useful, you can also find other information at qedod.com or russellthackeray.com. Stay tuned to the end for details of how to order a free ebook. Enjoy the podcast. So today I'm really looking forward to be talking to Caroline Johnson. Caroline's an expert in journaling, which is actually had a really interesting career and interesting life and been doing all sorts of fascinating things that we're going to talk about. But I'm hoping we're going to talk a lot about journaling in her new book, or a book she's written, and one of a series, I believe. So I'm very much looking forward to this. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Russell.
So where in the world are you, Caroline?
I'm based in Ayrshire now. I'm originally from Northern Ireland, but I've been living here since 1994.
So how
it feels very much like home.
So how are you finding the upper reaches of the UK?
Yes, I'm adjusting to the cold. Where I lived in Northern Ireland, we had the benefit of the warm weather coming in occasionally. At least it didn't feel as cold as it does in Ayrshire. So I've adjusted to that. My husband just looks at me and says, "But you live in Scotland," so the expectation is there that you just get on with it. So yeah, I am getting on with it.
Fantastic. I know when I used to live in the northeast, unless it was, about 20 degrees below, it was just described as t-shirt weather. Yes. So it's, it's one of those things, isn't it? So, Caroline, if you meet people, what do you say you do? How do you describe what you get up to?
Very hard to put a hat on me because I have a number of different hats. I work as part-time as an employment law advisor and dealing with various companies across the UK and Ireland. And then I'm also somebody who runs workshops where I dare people to be happier. And that sometimes and definitely always involves an element of resilience in that. Then I'm also a writer and I'm a poet as well. So yeah, I've got those different hats on. So just sometimes it depends who I'm speaking to, what I say I do. And if I'm at a dinner party, I say I work in an office. Then I don't get bombarded with questions and somebody's employment law issues.
Right, yeah, because I get it. There's always someone who's saying, yeah, my employer said this.
Yes.
So what's your background? How did you get to where you were to where you are today?
I think my background, mainly I've worked in HR. That's been most of my career, but I've done some other jobs in between. And I got to a stage where in 2002 I had a decision to make about what I wanted to do next in terms of I needed to get a job. I was very newly a single parent, had very little money. And not long after that, actually, I ended up getting no maintenance at all of any sort. So I needed to do something with 4 children. And I had to decide whether or not I would do psychology or I would do HR. And HR was what I had traditionally done. So in a way, it was an easy thing to go back into. But for a while, I had worked with the community mental health team. And the more I spoke to, particularly psychologists and the psychiatrists, to try and figure out why did some people face very similar circumstances and one be devastated by it and their life totally change and not really ever be able to get beyond that, and then other people learn how to bounce back. And I could never really get an answer to that question. And because of that, actually I decided not to do psychology, but HR still involves psychology. It's what makes people tick and how to get the best out of people in the workplace and how to engage them. That's what I'm particularly interested in. But in 2002, I read a book by an American author called Cheryl Richardson, who's still probably one of my favourite authors, and it was called Stand Up for Your Life. And it was a book and it had lots of questions in it, and really guided questions, as I can now see, about journaling. And I worked my way through that, and that really changed who I was. It helped me to put a lot of boundaries in that I hadn't been doing. It helped me definitely bounce back, and my life started to change at that point. And then in 2006, I was in a particularly difficult job. Difficult in terms of it was a senior role, but it wasn't that element of it. It was the culture that I really struggled with, because it was a very bullying culture. And obviously what I wasn't realising at the time was it was a huge conflict in my values, and that became very difficult. And I ended up with stress. I'm off work with stress, really questioning my capability. What did I want to do in my life? Lots of different questions. But as a result of that, I actually got really quite depressed. And so I went to a meeting in Glasgow, and I don't know who said it to me, but somebody said you need to try gratitude journaling, which I hadn't really heard of. But obviously since now I've found out a lot more about that and all the research around that. And that's when I came home that night and sort of sat with a journal, because I had been journaling before that. But I sat with a journal and tried to think of one thing to be grateful for. And it actually took me an hour to think of one thing, because that's where my mind was at that time. And then I often say that's the year that changed my life totally. So everything that I'm doing now, really, and all of what I learned, I now put into practice in my courses and in my writing.
Okay. Well, do you mind if we pick that apart then? So you said that you started gratitude journaling. So what is journaling, first of all?
It's funny, I do often get asked that, and the most common question I'll get asked is it the same thing as writing a diary? And it's not, because that's simply a record of your day. And while it may involve touching on some of the ways that you're feeling and some reflection in that, it doesn't tend to do that. Whereas journaling, there's so many different ways that you can use journaling. I mean, the third book that I'm writing is at the moment is 101 journaling tools, because the more I've sort of explored this, and a lot of the things that I've done and used, I've realised are really just different ways of using a journal. Because I think for me it's a mindful tool. I live a very busy life. One of my ex-colleagues one of them said I must have 48 hours in the day, and another one asked me if I had a time TARDIS, because I'm always managed to do so much, but that's not always good. So sometimes I just need to slow my life down, and journaling for me really helps me to do that, because it is a mindful tool, a reflective tool. It's actually really useful for activists, for slowing them down enough to reflect a little on what they're planning to do. But it works in really for anybody. I'm passionate, really passionate about it, because everybody would benefit. And that's not me saying it. The scientific evidence is all there for why journaling works. Journaling works in a particular way. Dr. Robert Emmons has written a lot about gratitude journaling, and you can research a lot about yourself online if you wanted to, but it's just that power of starting to be grateful for things in your life, and that change in your focus. So you automatically start to become more positive as a result of that. Not immediately, but certainly I say to people, you've got to give it 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And if you do that, your life will start to change.
Okay, so help me understand then. So actually, before we get into the process, so I mean, you're saying life starts to change, but what are the sort of benefits that journaling can bring? Because it's not a guaranteed process, because it's like everything, you've got to actually commit to it and do it well. Yeah. But what are the sort of potential benefits I might get?
The interesting thing for me for journaling, when I started to really get into the research for it, is you can't lose with journaling, really. It benefits your mental health and your physical health, and the physical health side of it fascinated me, because particularly for people, and not just for people, but people who have chronic health conditions, they're starting, over the last probably 15 to 20 years, that's when they've really started to research this, but it improves things like your lung function, improves your heart, and people who've had issues with their hearts, those chronic illnesses, like whether it's ME or chronic fatigue or asthma, even similar things like that, all have improved. It's also a really useful tool for dealing with trauma, although I would never work with anybody with trauma myself. I would get them and encourage them to work with a mental health professional through that. But the journaling element of it has been shown to do that. But it's also, from the mental health perspective, there's overwhelming evidence that it benefits your mental health. And I think, and that's partly for me because it's a mindfulness tool, so it does slow me down a wee bit, but it's also, it helps you see, like, how it benefits your life is it helps you see so many things that you're doing that are actually not helpful in your life. So you can see patterns that you're running. you can see at the end of a year, if you review your journals, that, oh gosh, I said that this time last year and haven't done anything about that. It helps you see habits that you've developed. And for me, because I'm a neuro-linguistic master practitioner, so that use of language is really vital, and it tells so much, the language that people use. But you can see the language that you're using when you actually see it written down. But from a mental health perspective, it's that's partly why it really works, because you're getting, if you're an overthinker, it works for you because it gets a lot of your thoughts just out of your head and onto a page. It gets a lot of your emotions out. And when they're in black and white, they're actually easier to address than they are when they're whirling around your head and your body all the time.
Right. So it's interesting the way you describe that. So you said it's part of the mindfulness toolkit. So some of these physical elements are actually about sitting down. And is it using mindfulness tools like breathing and such, like when you're doing this, or is it the process of just sitting down and stopping and reflecting and being mindful for a moment allows your body to sort of repair itself, renew through the process of literally stopping?
Yes, it's. I mean, I mean, personally, I use it, and not always. I mean, if I'm really upset, I'll pick my journal up and I'll start writing about it, about whatever I'm upset about it, and that's really helpful. So when you're upset about something, you're not really conscious enough to stop and say, I must remember to breathe before I do anything. But when I consciously do spend time and get into that breath and that space, and then write, and just trust my unconscious mind to let things come out. And there's some brilliant tools for that. There's a thing called proprioceptive journaling, which is for a very limited time, done with a candle, done with Baroque music, where you are almost put into a slight trance, because it affects your theta waves and your brain, and that helps you to get access some of the things that are in your unconscious mind. So from that point of view, the mindfulness for me is the slowing down. And people will sometimes say to me, I don't have time to journal. And if anybody who knows me personally would say, if Caroline can journal, anybody can journal. But also, I feel this very strongly. If you haven't got 15 or 20 minutes in your day or every other day to invest in yourself, you're really much too busy. Your life is too busy. And why are you so busy? Then that's why you need to start journaling to figure out why you're so busy. So that's why I say you can't really lose with it.
Yes. I mean, a lot of people spend their time being busy fools, don't they? Being busy on stuff that really doesn't matter. Okay, then. So actually, so you used a term then linked to Baroque music, which interested me, and candles. So what was that about? What was that term? Because I didn't even know there were different types of journaling.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, in my book, I sort of deal with 7 main ones, and probably the main one that I would use would be stream of consciousness writing. So that is just, which is similar to what Julia Cameron writes about in her. She suggests that you write 3 pages, morning pages, she calls them. I'm an extremely tiny writer. I would have written a book in that time if I wrote 3 pages. So, but and that's a real discipline. She insists on that every day, that you just start writing, and you don't even. People often say that to me. What do you write? And I say, stop worrying about that. Just start writing, and go with what actually you start writing about.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. So imagine I'll be your subject for a minute, if that's okay. So because I think that'll help other people who are in my sort of place. So I've never journaled. I'm keen to journal. So how do I start? So do I need to do I have an excuse to go shopping and buy a book? Where does this all begin?
Yeah, well, let's start at the very beginning. Yeah, I mean, I think the journal. There are very few rules about journaling, which is one of the real things that I find attractive about it. The main rule is that there's 2. One is don't deal with traumatic issues by yourself. Mm-hmm. Second one is be honest. You need to be absolutely honest. This is not about how well you write or your grammar or anything like that. It's simply about you being really honest about what you're feeling and you're thinking, and not censoring that in any way as you write as well. Now that can become problematic depending on who you live with. If you can't absolutely trust somebody to not peek at your journal, then I would always advise that you do it online, or you keep your journal hidden somewhere. I mean, I have an agreement with my children and my husband. If I die, that they will just destroy my journals and immediately. It's not something that they will look at. They will just, and I trust them to do that, because I need to be very honest. And some of that honesty could be about them. And I don't want them reading that when I'm not in a position to explain what I was thinking at that time, probably not remember what I was thinking about at that time. So that honesty is really important. And what I also will say to people is if you're doing just sort of journaling, and I will come back on the how, but if you're journaling and something comes up that's really upsetting you, but you still need to write about it, is to get a blank bit of paper, scrap paper, write on the bit of paper, not in your journal, and then burn that piece of paper afterwards, or tear it up into wee tiny pieces and let it go in the sea. Do some sort of ritual with it at the end, but so that you've got it out of your system, but nobody can actually read what you say. So those are the only really two rules that there are, as far as I'm concerned, for journaling.
Right. So that's really good. And would you so before we get started then, so would you recommend online or a physical journal?
If you can do it physical journaling, there is some scientific evidence on that. And I think although people are amazingly creative in apps, and you can see even iPhone art now is becoming such a big thing, that there's something about the fact that your brain and your hand are engaged that actually helps you to write at a deeper level. So if you can, I'd always recommend paper and pencil of some sort. I often take my journals with me, though, to show people what my journals look like, because they're really not tidy documents at all. Sometimes I'll draw in them. Sometimes, I've got 3 or 4 columns in them. I've got diagrams, I've got ideas of whatever. It's just, and for me, I captured everything. And I actually was speaking to a friend who has been in some of my courses, but she's now a friend. But she said, we were talking, and she actually, I think she had 7 or 8 different journals for different things. And I said to her, but are you journaling? And she said, no, because I can never figure out which one of the journals I've got to write in. And I said, so just use one journal. And I mean, I have one journal at the front in my journal, and then sometimes I'll write down the side the things I'm grateful for, and sometimes I'll put those at the back of a journal as well.
All right.
It is just a case of getting it. I love a soft-backed journal. For me, it has to feel flexible. Yeah. In my hands, you can get beautiful journals, but they're very stiff, and there's something about that stiffness that doesn't really encourage writing.
Yeah, and I think metaphorically that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So okay, so I'm going to start from scratch, and I in order to help me get going, I know you're saying just start writing, but I suppose I need a structure to get me going. So I need to know, am I starting at the end of the day and reviewing the day in some way? What's the best way to start?
Can work. That can work. I mean, that is one particular type of journaling, which is simply a reflective journal. Right. And often, if you're going to use that, it's just, how did the day go? And there's sort of different options for that. Some people ask themselves 5 questions. How did the day go? What could I have done better? What will I do different tomorrow? What have I learned? So you could have a structure if you really want a very clear structure. Just develop your own questions and then ask yourself those questions, because even somebody like Benjamin Franklin had he's fascinating, such an amazing man in so many ways, but he did a form of journaling where he wanted to work on his virtues. So he developed this system where he had it, and you can see his books online, where it was 13 columns and it was 13 virtues. And what that meant was he did the same set of virtues 4 times a year. And then he would focus on whether or not, if he thought he'd been honest, he would tick it. If he didn't think he'd been honest, he had to work more on that the next day. So that was a real, somebody who was really committed to personal development and doing that. But then, look at what he achieved. It probably did help him grow.
So I get that. So I get the reflective idea, because that gives me a sense of structure. Because the thing is, I often find, and I know when people talk to me about stuff that I'm very good at, and I find that I'm very fluent at it, when people talk to me about it, it's actually quite hard to break it back into that beginner mode, isn't it? So I understand the reflection thing, because I use reflection at work and I use reflection as part of my own personal life. So I can imagine sitting down and having a piece of paper in front of me and reflecting on my day. Now, so that's one approach, and I get that. Is there another approach that I might start with if I'm less keen on structure?
If you're less keen on structure, you just pick your book up and you start writing. That's the stream of consciousness stuff. And I think we get scared of that idea of, I don't know, maybe it's just one of those that seems a wee bit too new agey, but it actually just means let yourself go and just write. And sometimes, I mean, it works. When I do this in workshops, I'll say, sit down, put the paper up in front of you, pick the pen up and start writing, even if what you say is at the beginning is, I don't know what I want to write about today. And then but I'm going to keep writing. And as long as you don't take your pen off the paper, you will start to write and stuff will start to come up. But also, so on a daily basis, if, in terms of beginners, if you were going to use it, I would just get up and just start small. I always say, always set yourself up for success. Because if you say, I'm going to journal every day, you're not going to do that, particularly if it's a new habit. It's unlikely you're going to keep that up. But if I'm going to journal a few times a week and commit to that, and I want to just write, maybe what I'll do is I can write. I mean, sometimes what I'll do is I'll take myself off because I'm upset about something. I don't quite know why I'm upset, but I'll go away and I'll journal about how I'm feeling.
Okay, so that's really practical. I understand that. So what you're saying is you can journal at any time it's about looking for a trigger. So in other words, you can say, okay, I've noticed something about myself in my life. That's an opportunity to journal about it. And what you're doing is, effectively, rather than talking out loud to someone, like a talking therapy even, or talking to somebody else, you're using the journal as the like a mirror to write things down with, and you can reflect on that later if you want to. But it's just a way of being able to express yourself in the moment.
Absolutely, and it works.
So you're writing down what you did, what you thought, how you felt, what it meant, what was going through your mind, and it's sort of anything really. That stream of consciousness about an event that's happened to you.
Exactly, but you wouldn't. There was very few friends who would listen to you in the way you would want to write about that, though. That's the thing as well. Or, just because you're going into sort of minutiae that they're not really interested in, but you can write down about, and that though is that's been really powerful for me, because I remember coming home on a train one night, and there was two carriages, and there was a young lad on it, and he was incredibly loud. Everybody could hear him on the train. And I got really annoyed and really agitated at it. And I came home and I thought, I need to journal. Why did I get so upset and wound up about that? Because it really didn't merit it. But it turned out that once I'd sort of spent the time doing that, it was because I wasn't using my voice. I wasn't speaking up. And that actually led me on, I joined Toastmasters as a result of that, which was great fun. I ended up speaking at conferences that I never would have ever thought I could have done. And I probably wouldn't have been able to do until I was able to figure out, why did that loud guy annoy me? And then, okay, that's what I need to do to change so that it's not annoying me the same way, because I'm actually annoyed at myself.
Mm-hmm. So that makes sense. That makes enormous sense, because actually what you're able to do, you could either journal, when that person's kicking off, you could journal yourself in that moment, can't you? Or like you did, again, using it as a reflective type thing.
Yes.
How does because you've mentioned it, and I'm a big fan of this. So how does gratitude journaling work?
Yeah, well, that for me is one of the sort of most amazing things, gratitude journaling, because it works because you start to change your focus. There are so many things that we could be thankful for that we're not thankful for, and it is a thankfulness practice, a gratitude practice as well. But what it starts to do is, it starts, as far as I'm concerned anyways, you start to change your focus, and then you start to change your happiness levels as well. Because what I now do is I can reframe really easily. So, I maybe was out for lunch, it wasn't a great lunch, and I could get really annoyed about the fact that I had to spend that money on a lunch that wasn't particularly great, or I could focus on the fact, actually, I had a really lovely time with the people I was with, and I'm grateful that I had that time with those people. So that just instantly I feel calmer, because I've been able to do that reframe and focus on that. But it's interesting for me, the gratitude stuff comes from, and this comes back to my sort of fascination with mental health, that when Maslow, if you go back to sort of Maslow's research, and he said we're getting it all wrong. What we're doing is we're trying to focus on the people who are not mentally healthy, and we're trying to figure out solutions, and most of those solutions are either talking therapies or they're drug therapies. Yeah. Why don't we focus on people who are mentally well and figure out what they're doing that's mentally well? And that then led to suppose Martin Seligman coming up with the whole sort of positive psychology movement, and still really we're only at the start of research on that. But I think Dr. Emmons, whenever he started to research, and he's a sort of primary researcher on that, it was part of a conference that he was being involved in, and they were looking at different virtues, humility, how that affected your forgiveness was another one. And he was asked to go away and do some research on gratitude. And there was nothing really at that point. And then he started to do the research on it. And then he found that actually, again, with that, there's lots of scientific evidence as well. People sleep better. It improves the level of optimism. And as you'll know, optimism is something that you can learn. And, it might not be where you are naturally in any continuum, but you can learn to be more optimistic. And that is really important for resilience. It's sort of one of the key things with resilience as well. So, but it also means that you feel less pain whenever you practice gratitude as well. So it physically affects your body to that degree.
Actually, this is fascinating. I think the thing is, actually, because it's so simple, it seems too easy, and it's part of the problem, isn't it? Sometimes the simplest things are the best. But there are people in the world who really struggle with writing, aren't they? Struggling with writing things down. I mean, is it okay to keep a journal, but like an auditory journal, like a set of recordings, for example?
I think if that's going to work for them, that still allows them to get what they're thinking out, doesn't it? And, it wouldn't, while the pen and paper and that link between the brain and the hand is very powerful, it's still really powerful to get things out. And ultimately, it won't suit everybody, just like mindfulness. Some people really struggle with mindfulness, and then they love yoga, and some people, there's so many different practices that you can do now. I just think for me, journaling is such a great tool because most people can use it. Once they relax and just start writing and getting into that habit of writing, they can do it. And as I said, there are, the proprioceptive writing, which I touched on earlier, is a fascinating tool in itself, because it's a very limited period that you write for, and you actually set a timer for it.
Right.
So if you like a structure and you only want to spend 15 or 20 minutes, you light the candle, you put the music on. So there's something about the flicker of the candle that helps put you into that meditative state as well. But in that journaling, what you do is you focus on what you're noticing. So normally, when stream of consciousness, I just write, and sometimes I'll asterisk something or I'll underline it so that I know I need to go back and think about that or look at that a bit deeper. But generally, it's just writing, and I don't really go over it again at all. But with the proprioceptive writing, you'd be writing about something, and then a thought will pop into your head, and you actually follow that thought. Rather than just sort of making a note and saying, I'll come back to that, you actually then change whatever you're writing about and you follow that thought. So that can become quite an interesting tool. I wouldn't use it all the time, but sometimes it's just a useful thing to do, just to swap what you're doing about. Mm. And then you ask questions. Sorry, there are specific questions that you have to ask about that as well, but yeah.
Wow. So I'm getting really excited. So you say you've written some books about this. So I'm guessing in the books you actually address the sort of process and practice of this. So tell me about, because I know you're in the middle of writing about 10 million books, because you seem to be very prolific. So tell me what you've written and where we can find those.
Yeah. Well, the first one was written simply. I used to sometimes do still run the course called An Introduction to Journaling, but something because I would be talking to people go, exactly what you've been asking as well. And I thought, well, what do people need to know to get them started journaling? So it is simply an introduction to journaling, and it's being described, which I think was one of my best descriptions, as somebody's wee blue book, in the way that somebody would wear a black dress, and it was a Harry Potter adult book, which I thought was amazing as well, in terms of she felt that book had really changed her and this book had really changed her. It's a short book, but it's deliberately short because I just want to sort of get to what do I write, when do I write, how do I write, what are the main tools I can do, and then I do give some sort of questions that people can ask themselves as well as giving sort of 7 of the key tools that I would personally use. So that's the first book, and then the second one is it's just 20.
So that's the one that's out on Amazon at the moment, isn't it?
That's the one on Amazon, and yeah, you should be able to order it from a bookshop as well. It should be there. So. Well,
I'm just looking at your reviews, Caroline. Blimey, they're amazing.
They are. I'm really pleased. I mean, it went to number 1 in the wellness charts on the day it was released, and I was really about that.
Congratulations. I mean, normally there's someone giving you something snarky somewhere, but I mean, that's an amazing set of,
I do have a 1-star review on Goodreads, and I don't even know if they read it. So it's just because they didn't make a comment, they just gave me a 1-star. So that, that's fine. I don't mind. If people do read it, it is really helpful for me to get a review. But also, my email address is out there, so if people have an issue, I prefer they got in contact with me and we could have a chat about it, and I learn from that as well. I'm always keen to learn and improve.
Well, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback, as of course we both know from the NLP toolkit. So Dare to be Happier, which is an introduction to the power of journaling, will give us the sort of basics and allow us to have a place to answer all the sort of questions I've been asking.
Yeah.
And it talks about this. It talks about the rules. Talks about the science and such like in a bunch of tools and questions. So that's actually really practical, isn't it? And it's only $4.99 on Kindle. So that sounds like a really good present for someone if it's that time of the year, of course. But not then, of course, at other times.
Yes.
Any time of the year. And so you're writing some other books as well. You were saying.
There's 7, and my overall theme is Dare to be Happier. So that's ultimately what I'm doing, is I want to help give people tools to help them be happier and help them see what's getting in the way of them being happy as well. So there are 7 in the series on journaling. The next one's hopefully coming out next year is 25 different reasons to journal, which covers things like everything from being your own alchemist. I love that book, but you can actually be your own. You want to change things in an amazing way, start to journal. You want to find out what your purpose is, start to journal. You want to be more creative, journal.
And I understand you're going to write a book around the 101 tools of journaling as well. So that's obviously going to be, a very handy and practical book, I'm guessing, because that's going to have to be practical to have that many sort of pointers in it.
It is, and again, that I think you can write a lot of words, but they're not necessarily useful words. One of my favourite books is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, and I wish that book was 3/4 of the size it was. I love the first 3/4, and I recommend that book to so many people, but the last quarter I really struggle with. So I sort of went for, I just want to give you the tool. You might not like to do this, journal in this way, but you might want to do it this way. And if you're into lists, well, here's the thing. Or if you're into trying to generate ideas, there's a tool called, you've probably heard of this, Lists of 100, where the first sort of 30 things are easy, the next 30 you struggle with, and the last 30 ideas you really struggle with. But that's usually where you get the really powerful stuff. So that's a journaling tool. So it's sort of give those lists, and then there will be 4 specific books on with much more guided questions on, if you want to nurture yourself and learn how to do that, if you want to be more balanced, if you want to, if you're going through transitions and change, which can, it's just part of life. But it can be very rocky in those stages, and how do you bounce back? So obviously that will have quite a bit about resilience as well, and developing that too. So those books are all sort of half written, but next year is going to be a big year for me, putting my head down and actually writing.
Complete a finisher year next year, is it?
Yes.
Well, Caroline, it's been amazing. Thank you so much. People can find you at daretobedifferent.co.uk, is that right?
No, Dare to be Happier.
Dare to be Happier, even better. .co.uk or .com?
.com.
Okay, we'll link to you from our site as well.
Thank you very much.
Happier.com. And you can find you on Amazon, and your book is Dare to be Happier, The Secrets of Journaling. Yeah. And
it's an introduction to the magic of journaling, yes. And then I'm also on Twitter at Dare to be Happier as well.
Brilliant. And well, you're a force of nature, and I thoroughly enjoyed this afternoon. It's really, I'm going to actually have a break for the next couple of weeks, so I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to have a go.
Oh, great news.
Yeah. And thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been really useful, and I can actually heartily recommend journaling myself, because I've actually used it as a homework for other people in hypnotherapy sessions, and a lot of people have come back and been surprised. Actually, I think that's the phrase that people use most to me: surprised at how good it was and how useful it was. And I think people are just surprised because it seems so easy. But you've brought technique around it, which I think actually makes it have a stronger sense of purpose for people.
Fabulous. Thank you for that, Russell.
Well, thanks so much, Caroline, and I shall speak to you very soon. You take care.
Thanks. You too.
We hope you found today's podcast useful. If you did, why not subscribe and listen to our other podcasts? We would love it if you could leave us a review. To access our resilience coaching, contact us at info@qedod.com. And finally, if you'd like to download our free resilience ebook, go to qedod.com/free ebook. Thanks for listening.